Senator King, please.
Thank you. First, I want to welcome Senator Tuberville from the end of the row. He's now no longer at the end of the. Senator Tuberville, welcome to the end, from not being on the end of the row, as you have been very ably.
It got very lonely on that end,
well,
especially with this big room that we had. Thank you.
Mr. Zuckheim, first I want to thank you for your organization and leadership of the Reagan Defense Forum, which is a really important part of thinking through some of these strategic questions. Here's my question. It strikes me as you look back at the Ukraine conflict that if you combine the Ukrainians' will to fight with the resources of the West and the United States, Putin really in the long run doesn't stand a chance. It strikes me that Putin's best hope now is dividing the West and dividing the United States. Do you think that's a legitimate concern?
I absolutely think that's part of the Putin strategy. I think he also questions the will of the West to continue to support Ukraine for the long haul.
That's what I mean.
Absolutely, yes. I agree with that.
He wants to divide us, get us tired of the conflict, and then he's just going to win through the passage of time.
I think that's his approach, Senator. I agree.
And you mentioned, you used the word a few minutes ago, speedily. And one of my concerns is that, for example, with the tanks, our response has been slow, and then we have to go through training. And I'm worried right now at this moment that the Russians are preparing for a major offensive in the east that the Ukrainians aren't going to be ready for because they don't have the equipment. In other words, we've telegraphed to them that we don't have the tanks there yet, and they're going to try to take advantage of this gap. Is that something of concern?
Yes, Senator. I think the unclassified information I've reviewed certainly suggests that. And the way I think about it, Senator, is the strategy here is to help Ukraine realize a counteroffensive, to break through that Russian line that is emerging in the Donbass. To do that, we should give them all the capabilities necessary. Tanks is one example. Fourth-generation fighter aircraft is another. And we tend to think about the platform and get stuck rather than thinking about the strategy. If we trust Ukraine to restore its sovereign territory, then we should trust them with the platforms to do that and not worry they're going to use the platform for some other purpose or escalate the battle beyond the territory of Ukraine.
Have the Ukrainians been respectful of those limitations in terms of escalating the battle into Russia?
Best and I can tell, yes. There have been some debates, I believe, on the margins, but it's always been focused on within the sovereign territory of Ukraine.
Dr. Hill, I know you touched on this. It worries me, looking at a map yesterday, the Belarus border is about 60 miles from Kyiv. If I were Putin, I'd be very tempted to try to have another offensive toward Kyiv and the decapitation of the government. I take it you believe that Belarusian politics and the regional balance does not raise the level of risk of that happening.
Well, look, I think the risk is always there because, of course, Belarus and its President Lukashenko are very much dependent on Russia at this particular point. And, of course, there's an awful lot of troops there. But I think that the pressures inside Belarus, political pressures, would make it very difficult for Lukashenko to contemplate this. This would also be a huge alarm bell for all of the other former Soviet republics. I mean, if Belarus has been actually deployed in this war, I think we're going to see a pretty aggressive response from others as well.
And based upon the intelligence that we saw a year ago, we would know if the Russians were moving significant forces in that direction.
Yeah, we've seen build-up, getting back to what Senator Tuberville was talking about before, about the placement of men and equipment there. Looks like some of them are being trained. But we haven't seen, particularly at the moment, that we're expecting waves of people going over the Belarusian border, but we mustn't rule it out.
And in fact, that ties part of the strategy probably of those deployments is to tie the Ukrainians down to some extent, defending that border rather than putting all their forces in the east and the south. Absolutely, and Putin is at pains all the time to still raise the threat to Kyiv itself of another assault. And I think, getting back to what Mr. Zuckheim said before about not being sanguine about anything, actually, we have to be continuously vigilant and, continue to look at the intelligence about any of these contingencies. Dr. Lin, final question. The key to the success thus far of the Ukrainians has been their amazing courage and will to fight. How do you assess the will to fight of the people of Taiwan and their leadership? Is there leadership of the Churchillian quality of Zelensky? or are they closer to, let's say, Ghani?
That's an excellent question, Senator. I think Taiwan is strengthening its will to fight. It's very encouraging for Taiwan to look at what Ukraine has accomplished, and it's instilling more confidence in the Taiwan people. I would also note that unlike Ukraine, where folks could leave via land, Taiwan is surrounded by water. So even if we're not necessarily seeing the strong will now, when push comes to shove, I think many people in Taiwan will find they have no escape routes and they need to fight for their home.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.